Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today with 8 things you should be doing in F1 2020 MyTeam Career Mode. Now, this video is not necessarily aimed at those of you that play this game mode a lot, or played the F1 game over the years a lot. Maybe for the newer players out there that don't know how the mechanics work and maybe need some helping tips on how to enjoy their experience more, enhance it, whether it be doing better earlier on or actually prolonging the experience in some kind of cases you'll see later on in this video. So we've got 8 things. I did this last year. It seemed really helpful for those of you who are new to the F1 game, so let's get into it. Number 1, now this actually caught me out as well. I didn't really know this was really that much of a thing, but picking your answers very wisely at the start of the game when you get press interviewed by Will Buxton, because those answers actually have a massive difference to where you start off with on the R&D tree. We already knew it would somehow foundationally set up your My Team. We were told if you answered questions in a certain way, maybe you would get one department that started off a little bit further ahead, i.e. the engine or the aero or the chassis side. But what was not made apparent really also is even the questions about where you want to be in Formula 1, they make a massive difference to just where you start off, and you can actually be a little bit closer to Williams or a lot closer to Haas or Alfa Romeo, and that will affect your entire career mode experience because you'll start off with a head start essentially. Now, I think I remember answering something about being close to Alpha Tauri, obviously, so that's a little bit further up the road, so I ended up kind of having a midway packed depending on where I answered, but that's a really big thing. So if you're one of those players that you already play the F1 game for a fair few years, you want a real big challenge, I recommend choosing the answers where it says, battling near Williams, battling for, just the last points or whatever, to really give yourself a challenge and not any sort of head start. But of course, I did not understand that this mechanic was actually so powerful in that kind of way and could actually move you up and down the R&D order tree that much. I thought it'd be quite more subtle, really, but it seems it's actually quite a powerful tool, and effectively is like a disguised way of saying what the difficulty you want, almost, without obviously affecting the actual AI level, just a difficulty of how much of a head start you want with your My Team Career Mode team. Number 2, now on the subject of answering those questions, also if you do want to get a head start on certain areas of the car, so we're talking choosing between the engine side, chassis, aero, durability, I would recommend you answer going towards having an engine advantage, especially if you're going to start with Honda or Renault potentially, but of course you can improve them to a really great level. But if you want that head start, if you're maybe newer to the F1 games and you find it difficult to race against the AI, get the engine head start, because the engine power is so important in this game. The AI is so good in a straight line at managing ERS and whatnot. You're going to want to try and get as deep as you can into the engine side of the tree early on to unlock those fuel upgrades, the ERS upgrades, and just pure engine power as well. And then I recommend also trying to upgrade as much as you can on the aerodynamics drag reduction side of things, because yeah, the aerodynamics on the downforce wise and cornering, the chassis and whatnot is important, but against the AI consistently, the most time you're going to lose in a lot of places is honestly the exit of corners on those straights where you need to just reduce the drag, get the engine power up, and especially now with the way the ERS system is, especially at the start of the game where you cannot use overtake mode pretty much every single lap, every straight like I do currently in my career mode because everything's upgraded. At the very start of the season, trying to get early updates in to allow you to use overtake mode early on is going to be really crucial. I even didn't do this in my own career mode. I probably should have done way more ERS upgrades to basically counteract that, and I did them later on. So now I'm kind of reaping the benefits in Season 3, but if you did them earlier, you can get a much better place against the AI, especially if you're struggling personally. Of course, if you're not, then you might not want to on purpose to make sure you kind of get that correctly, and that's kind of also what I'm going to go into later on, is just trying to do certain things that if you're a more experienced player, here's how you're going to enjoy the game for a little bit longer, in my opinion. Number 3, though, continuing the tips that you should be doing if you're maybe a newer player to the game, and I would say do not waste time on training your F2 teammate unless you want to keep him, unless you're going to be doing a career mode where you want to grow a certain F2 driver of yours. If they're a favorite of yours in the current F2 season, then maybe you want to see them do well into Formula 1, so you might want to grow them. But if you're not going to, if you're set on signing a current F1 driver that's your favorite, or just one of the top guys essentially, or someone you have in mind, just don't waste time on the activity timeline training them. There's just no point. Use that time to get your claim up or develop the car in certain ways. So whether it be trying to boost the morale, if you want to try and get upgrades in faster, or personally for me, I honestly think a claim, because the higher your claim is, you get more money, therefore you upgrade your facilities faster, and therefore you're going to get the upgrades faster in the end. So it's kind of a long-term project in that kind of sense, as is the whole thing about my team. But definitely, if you're not going to keep them, just don't bother even wasting any time. I certainly didn't, and I know at the time, a lot of you guys were asking why not, but that's because in my plan, I was never going to keep Mick Schumacher. I was never going to keep Jack Aitken as my teammate. I was always going to switch it up to an F1 driver the very first chance I had in Season 2. And so finally, number 4 out of these 8, this is the last one, which is kind of more of a tip for beginners to boost yourself in the career mode. When you're about 1/3 away from the end of the season, just stop upgrading the car as you are, essentially, and start saving up resource points, because that's the period where you will get an email that says there might be a regulation change, and then you'll get that cutscene where Carl comes into the garage and tells you there is going to be a regulation change. So for the last third, that's the kind of period where it comes in. I can't quite remember what the earliest Grand Prix is. The earliest one I've had before has been Italy, so I think it could come around there to Singapore time, but it has come as late as USA or Japan. So it's in the kind of last third period of the season. Just start saving resource points, even if you feel quite comfortable, just in case. You never know. Obviously, it might be a little bit different if you are comfortable where the car is and whatnot. Give yourself a challenge into the next season, then maybe don't do that. But if you're a new player to the F1 game, you've never really gone through multiple seasons and your car is lagging behind a little bit, it's actually a great way to leapfrog some cars through the winter period by saving those R&D points and adapting all the upgrades you have so far, and then also purchasing further ones through the winter before that first season that in that next race, this Australian Grand Prix, comes through. As I mentioned though, just then in point number 4, I talked about potentially if you're a more experienced player, you want to try and prolong your career experience. Now I'm going to start some tips, these next 4, of how to prolong it. So this is very useful if you're creating videos like myself also, but any of you guys who just want to play the F1 game for a bit longer and enjoy it more, I really think there's certain things you can do, which obviously is maybe essentially going against what naturally you'd want to do to be the best at the game and try and improve your team as much as you can. But if you want to try and prolong the game and kind of play it through the entire game cycle and enjoy it more, I honestly think you need to be doing these just to prolong that cycle, essentially. So number 5 is going to be, don't buy any resource generation upgrades on any of the HQ facilities. Resource point generation, it starts off slow. It seems like a massive grind at the start of the game, but as soon as you get a good teammate that can also get you resource points, as soon as you start getting better in terms of, where you're placing, you're going to earn more R&D points. And especially with the teammate thing, that's a massive thing for me. From Season 1 to Season 2, having Jack Aiken and Mick Schumacher in the car compared to Carlos Sainz, it was a massive difference. An extra, you're at least talking extra 150 to even 300 resource points you're getting from your teammate through the practice sessions and in the race if he does better, of course. So to prolong how hard it is to upgrade your car rapidly, I would say don't buy any of those upgrades. It may be very tempting at the start because it is, I admit, very slow at the start, but long term, you can't unbuy those upgrades. With the HQ upgrades, there's no mechanic in the game to reset them. Once you've got that upgrade, it's there with you for the entire game save, so there's no going back. So you will get to a point, and I've seen evidence of this, some of you guys in my subreddit also posting it, that if you have too many resource points, even if you have a triple resource regulation change, like engine, aero, and chassis, you might get to a point where you have like 20,000 resource points. You can adapt most of them, if not all of them, and then you'll end up with a ridiculous situation where you're so far ahead of every other team, and your entire career mode save is pretty much ruined in terms of the experience you're going to get for the remainder of how many seasons you've got left out of 10. Number 6, now I mentioned practice programs. I would say definitely, and those of you who've been playing the F1 games for at least 2 years now will hopefully know this, but if not, you can actually simulate practice programs, and I know from personal experience, it's always been such a faff to do them. They take way too much time, especially if you're playing a lot of the F1 game, but let's say, it's that time of the year, going back to school or whatever, or you're back to work after lockdown and whatnot. I mean, you might be back in it if there's another lockdown, but if you're going everywhere and you're busy during the day, you may not have a lot of time to play the F1 game. You don't have time for practice programs. Just simulate them, and as I said, if you have an F1 driver teammate, pretty much any of them, but especially the midfield to higher tier teammates, if you simulate the practice sessions, you're going to get a decent amount, especially with that teammate adding on to that bonus, because he will also buy driver perks potentially. Remember, when you sign a teammate, if you spend more money than their contract cost is actually worth, they're going to take that extra money, and the AI is going to decide if they buy driver perks. Just as like you can, the personal player, you can buy your own driver perks. So they might buy resource point generation for themselves. So they'll earn you even more resource points than they naturally will in the game. So that also couples into why you might not want to buy resource point generation for your HQs, because you might actually be getting way too much anyway from your teammate every time if you're simulating through them. So it's a fine balance, but also, yeah, definitely simulate sessions. I know from Season 2, but even Season 1, to be honest, it just gets repetitive. They're the same programs that have been there since 2016, pretty much, give or take, like a few new ones, obviously, for ERS and whatnot, but after a while now, it has kind of got a little bit dull to even me. I'm a massive fan of the F1 game, but it's just not that interesting now after a few years. It's something I really hope they change and just mix up a little bit, going on to the next generation of consoles, maybe for the new F1 games. But yeah, definitely if you didn't know that, because I know there's still to this day some people that don't know, you can just click one button. It's on the main menu on my steering wheel. It's literally the X button, I think, and you can just simulate all the way through to qualifying. You don't have to do any of the programs, and yet you get a decent amount of points. You don't get the same amount of points as you would get. I think you get about 500 to 600 max, maybe. If you were to do them all manually, you get about maybe max 300 if you simulate them, but it's really not a bad payoff, saving yourself maybe up to half an hour, 45 minutes doing practice programs. Number 7 is going to be don't stack your engine penalties. Now, again, this is, like I said, one of those things that seems counterproductive because it's a smart thing to do when you want to get a jump on AI is stacking penalties. Even I've stacked penalties, but I'll probably stop doing that as I go on through my career mode now. You'll probably see in the series, because if you stack penalties, it's just so overpowered against the AI to get a jump on them, because the AI don't have a mechanic like that. They don't think like that. They don't think about, oh, I need to take one engine penalty, I may as well take 5 now and just, you know, bank them all up in one go and save myself the hassle later on in the season. They will eke out those engine penalties when they need to, and so it's actually a clever thing to keep it balanced and fair against the AI, just to eke them out yourself. So if you have a worn MGUK, just change out the MGUK. Don't bother trying to go for the whole tactical, get a whole row of penalties, even though it is the more clever thing to do. If you don't do that, by the way, you should if you want to get a jump on AI, but if you want to prolong the career mode, if you're a better player than most, then definitely just don't stack them. Trust me, it'll even out. You'll make it fairer against the AI, because God knows the AI already gets so unlucky with DNFs anyway, let alone having engine penalties. And we know, as you've seen from my videos, and I'm sure you'll know if you play the game enough, the AI, they're great at racing each other, you know, most of the time, but a lot of the time as well, they do find it very tricky in some circumstances to get through traffic. And so if they get a penalty, even if it's a Lewis Hamilton getting a penalty, he might find it very hard to get back up into, you know, the top 5 positions that you're fighting for, and you might be fighting for the championship, and that may just well ruin your entire experience of having a good fight in the championship with Hamilton or whatever the AI you're fighting. And finally, for number 8, and it's nothing new really if you've played the games enough, but as I say, this for any of you guys who have also not played the game, do not fast forward the sessions in qualifying if you can help it. So what I mean by that is, if you've got 15 minutes of the session, you've done your 2 laps or you've done 1 lap, just, if you can, if you got the time, just sit it out and just let the AI naturally go around the circuit, because when you fast forward the times, the AI just have this weird, odd glitch. It's been there since forever, and I know some people have tried to defend it and say it's just the track evolution. It's not. There's no track evolution that's going to gain you, like, consistently about 8/10 every single lap if you fast forward it, and that's sometimes what can happen. So if you can help it, just don't fast forward them, because what will happen is the AI just gain a ridiculous amount of time, and so you could be placed in a pretty decent position. Let's say, I don't know, if you're fighting for Q3, you could be in the top 10, P8. You fast forward the session, and you're going to be way down in like P13, P14. I know it's happened to me before. Same thing with a top 10 shootout. You could be up in the second row or something like that, first row, and you could be knocked down all the way to P9. So if you can help it, just don't fast forward this session. So those are 8 things that I think you should do in F1 2020 MyTeam Career Mode. Like I said, the first 4, and also I guess the kind of last 2 there, are 4 tips for those of you guys who have maybe not played the F1 games a lot. Maybe it's your first F1 game ever. If it is, I hope you're enjoying it. It definitely is probably one of the best F1 games career mode wise we've had so far in the entire franchise. And then some of those tips with some of you guys who have played the F1 games like me for so many years and want to prolong your career mode experience, enjoy them a little bit more. So it's basically essentially you need to do things that us as YouTubers might do to try and prolong a series and make things a little bit more interesting for longer. So as I've said in videos before, that's the reason why I'm never going to be buying resource point generation in my career mode series of mine, because it's just too overpowered. At later seasons, you just don't need that many resource points, especially because, as I said, unfortunately, there's no mechanic that resets HQ facilities. So once you get to a certain level on your team, you're just going to be earning so much money, so much resource points that you just don't need. So within 5 seasons, you could ruin your entire career mode save, which has occurred to some of you guys, as I said, because some of you guys have literally posted evidence of showing that your resource point chart is completely ruined now at like season 4 and 5, because essentially your team is just too big. You've got way too many resource points. You're earning so much money per race that basically you may as well just restart your entire career mode save, which is obviously something easily done. But if you spent, you know, a good few hours, you know, doing so many odd seasons or whatever, I feel like you would want to kind of continue the storyline in your own career mode save and, you know, see it out basically as long as you want to play it till the end of the game cycle. So if you guys go on to use any of these tips and do find it, you know, useful somewhat, and it does kind of improve your experience, then do let me know in the comments below. Come back to this video. If you did enjoy the video as well, then be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here, do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. I've been aarava. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.